Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Inuit Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 41st Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Cynthia Stevens, and I'm going to be chairing the panel today, the hearing today. And joining me from the Board of Revision are Linda McFadden and Richard Whitbread. Our secretary is Crystal Harland, and our assessors are Rodney Pontanilla and Jonathan Spacek. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by the questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. We will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 8 on our docket today. Mrs. Harlan, can you please affirm the assessors and the applicant's testimonies?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Applicant, would you please rise? Mr. Assessor, pardon me. Would you please state your full name?
Jonathan Spacek.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, yes.
Thank you. Please be seated. Mr. Assessor, would you please state your full name?
Rodrigo Pontanilla.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mark Newman.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I'm just, since we have the same applicant for all of the items on the docket today, I'm just going to confirm now that we are looking at assessed value on all of these properties. And I noticed there is a preliminary issue on one property, but other than that, that's assessed value we're discussing today.
It is assessed value only, and I think Mr. Pontanilla will tell you the preliminary issue on that one property is no longer an issue.
Oh, okay. Well, we can discuss that when we get there then. Thank you. Okay, so the first item on the docket this morning is 119 Pulford Street. So Mr. Spacek, are you doing this one or Mr. Pontanilla?
Yes, I'm just doing 119.
Oh, okay. So Mr. Spacek, please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you very much. So we are looking at file number 24-3559, roll number 120320901000. We are at 119 Pulford Street. We have a 2025 value of $1,007,000. This is a 10,824 vacant commercial lot. So we have it up as VCOM. It is currently being used as a parking lot, mainly for parking at 2 buildings that you will also hear on today, 130 Osborne and 435 Stradbrook Avenue. But if you look at my page 2, you'll see an aerial view of the parking lot. It's at the end of Pulford Street where it dead ends off of River Avenue. This is at the corner, give or take, of Osborne and Stradbrook. There is a sale of the subject property in 2018. It's a multi-roll sale, and I believe it includes 130 Osborne and 435 Stradbrook as well, but they have a sale price of $4,250,000. And if you turn to my page 4, you'll see a breakdown of how this is valued. We have some detached structure details at the top of page 4. This is a total total cost of $45,000 after depreciation. This is for the wood fence and the floodlight outdoor, the paving asphalt. And then in the land valuation is under that. You'll see it's highlighted. We have 10,824 square feet at $88.88, and that works out to $962,000 for the land value itself. Combined with the $45,000 gives us a total of $1,007,000. If we turn to my page 5, I've put together some land comparables. And you'll see there's 5 comparables in the area. We have a range of sales from 2016 to 2021, a range of land sizes from 4,478 square feet up to 17,408 square feet. And we have a total range for these land sales from $78.16 up to $105.78. Our subject property is at $88.80. And if you have any questions on any of the comparables, page 6 going forward shows an overview of that land sale with a above view map showing where it's located in the city. But that is my presentation. If you have any questions, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, any questions?
Just a couple. Mr. Spacek, we were in front of the board on September 17th, and at that time the board adjourned it so it could be brought forward with the adjacent properties at 130 Osborne and 435 Stradbrook. You're aware that the issue here is whether the 3 properties, but more particularly Pulford as the parking lot, should be treated as an economic unit with one or both of the other properties.
That's as I understand.
And you and I have dealt with that issue before, for example, in the context of 570 Portage, correct?
We've had that issue, yes.
And the city does recognize the concept. And it arises because outside of downtown Winnipeg, parking is a requirement in order for businesses to operate.
Yes, I understand.
Under the zoning.
Yes.
Right. Okay, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, do you have any questions?
What is your view of Mr. Newman's premise? Mr. Spacek.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Sorry, what is your view of Mr. Newman's premise that property should be adjoined to one of the other properties?
Should it be one economic unit? Is that the question? Yeah. I believe so. In my personal experience, for a situation like this, when there is a lot that is being used, say outside of its roll number or outside of its parcel, say in this case across the back lane, when I've been provided a lease showing that parking lot is solely a part of the lease for that building and required for it, then I agree with the argument that it is one economic unit. And when the parking, and then on the other hand, I've had properties where the parking is not solely used and saved for the tenants under the lease where they're paying for it. And then in my mind, it's not necessarily one economic unit. Maybe some of the stalls are required, maybe a portion of it. But again, when I see the lease that the parking lots are required for the tenancy, then it makes sense to me. Again, I'm not sure of the situation, and it might be the other assessor might have a better idea of having spoken with the agent on the subject properties. But again, I believe the argument is valid if the lot is strictly used for the tenants and they're being paid for monthly, or it's under the lease and it's nobody else can use it.
It's apparent by the evidence that there are a number of leases that include parking on this lot, but I understand too, and maybe Mr. Newman can clarify this later, that there is availability of spots for outside parking as well. In other words, there may be more spots than are required by the 2 buildings. Do you know if that is true?
I don't know. I don't know the exact specifics of the situation. I think
we can
the other assessor, Mr. Newman, will have probably more accurate answers for you.
Yeah. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden, do you have any questions?
Mr. Assessor, this lot is not actually being assessed as a parking lot at this point, though. Is that correct? It's being assessed
Yes,
as though
it's being valued on land, yeah.
As if it had some actual commercial potential for development. Is that accurate?
In my, I'm not sure exactly The zoning is C2, or no, sorry, the zoning is residential multifamily. The based on the size of 10,800 square feet, I do believe if it was for sale in the open market, there could be potential development of it, but again, it's gonna be a question of could the owner operate without the lot? And I think that's you're gonna have to look into today.
Okay, because looking at this lot, it certainly does not seem to have commercial development potential. It doesn't back onto
Not as
any.
much, no, I think it'd be more residential if anything, but
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. That's all my question.
And my questions have been asked and somewhat answered, but Mr. Newman might be able to provide us with more information on some of those questions. So, Mr. Newman, please proceed with your presentation.
So, do you have my brief of September 17th?
Yes.
Okay, so then I'll walk you through this. The detail of the leases and the requirement under the leases to provide parking is not actually contained in this brief. It's contained in the briefs for the other two properties. But I'll cover what's in this brief, and I'll cover it once only, and as I will with everything. So as I tell you in my brief at page 2, there are tenants at 130 Osborne. They are listed there. There are tenants at 435 Stradbrook. And these tenants have access to the stalls. Indeed, it is an obligation of the landlord in respect of these leases that these stalls be made available. Some of them are made available at no cost. That's the term of the lease. Some of them are made available at a charge, and I'll address that in more detail. What I will tell you generally at a high level is, to the extent there is revenue associated with the parking lot, that revenue is being included in the calculation of the value of 435 Stradbrook. So we're not trying to be crystal clear, we're not trying to avoid capturing the revenue that does come from the parking lot. We're taking it into account, not in this brief really, but in the other briefs, and I will show you that. So my position is it should be treated as an economic unit. The board has recognized this in the past. You've heard the assessor comment in response to your questions about whether if it's a requirement under the lease. And I've addressed that high level, but I'll address that in greater detail as we go along. So if you look then at page 4, you've got some photos, 4 and 5. You've got photos of the adjacent commercial buildings. Lower half of page 4 is 130 Osborne. Upper half shows you the entire corner of what I'll call Osborne and Stradbrook. The red teardrop is in the parking lot itself, the Pulford property, and immediately below that, truly immediately below that, is 435 Stradbrook, and to the left of 435 Stradbrook in the upper photo is 130 Osborne. And then on page 5, upper photo is looking north into 435 Stradbrook. Lower photo is the parking lot, which is immediately behind. So what I then do is I move into a discussion of the concept of economic unit. And as you've heard a little bit already, if you have a building that is covered by zoning bylaw 100 of 2004, the downtown zoning bylaw, in other words, then there is no requirement of parking. If you are outside the area, then there are requirements of parking. And on page 6, you see table 5.9 from zoning bylaw 200 of 2006. And you see the various categories which are dependent on use, numbered 18 through 22. And you see that depending on what the use is, you have somewhat varying requirements for parking. Category 18, if you're an office, for example, you need 1 stall for each 750 square feet, but not less than 2 spaces per tenant. If you're category 20 and the second last item in category 20 is retail sales, then you need one for each 250 square feet of floor area over 2,000 square feet, but a one space minimum. For restaurants, category 22, if they don't have a drive-through, then you need one spot for each 100 square feet of floor area. There are restaurants in both of the properties we're talking about, and again, we'll come to the lease in a more detailed way. So that's the starting point, the zoning bylaw. Then on page 7, I go into a discussion about the decision in the Forks. And the decision in the Forks related to, some of you may know, there is a multi-story parking structure in the Forks. And the question became whether that parking structure should be assessed. Should it be given a value as part of the assessment of the Forks, or should it be treated as something that is necessary for the Forks to operate? And therefore, the board determined, and at the bottom of page 7, you'll see the indented quote. The board determined that the parkade was necessary to support the property and therefore did not have a separate value. In other words, it was treated as part of the economic unit. And then also I tell you on to page 8 that this concept is recognized in the context of hotels. If you look at page 9, that is the workup. That is what a hotel workup looks like. What's important from your perspective is if you look to the bottom, you'll see capitalized value, $18,078,000, a deduction of 15% for FF&E, chattels and equipment, but then there's an adjustment. And there's a roll number reference there of $2,414,000. What that is that's a separate adjacent parking lot to the Club Regent Casino Hotel. Similarly, page 10, Canad Inns Windsor Park. Again, down at the bottom, you see less parking lot at the identified roll number, $246,000. So again, this is the recognition of the economic unit concept in the context of hotels. Then my page 11, this is a case Brian Dupuis and I did some years ago involving 570 Portage. You heard me reference that in a question to Mr. Spacek. He and I have since come to do that property a couple times. But here's a board of revision decision going back to 2015 in the context of the 2016 assessment. This is 280 Yonge, which is the parking lot behind 570 Portage. And at the top of page 12, there was the recommendation from the board that the owners apply to merge the roll number with the adjacent building to meet their lease requirements with regard to parking for their tenants. And in my experience, where there's a public lane separating the commercial building from the adjacent parking, the city, again, in my experience, will not merge the rolls. And then the last number of pages are the actual up through 13 through 16 is the full Forks decision or excerpts from the Forks decision. And then 17 is another example of 570 Portage, this time with Mr. Spacek. And again, what happened here is that, again, recognition was given to the concept of the economic unit. So again, as I've said to you, the detail of the leases and the requirements under the leases is not in this brief. It is in the brief for the two adjacent properties. I would leave that for when we deal with those properties. But really, all this was intended to do was introduce you to the concept of the economic unit and have you understand where it comes from and why it's done. And I would stop there and I would be open for questions.
Okay, so Mr. Newman, I just wanted to clarify then. So you're not putting a separate value on this property?
What I am saying to you ultimately, when we get to 435 Stradbrook, will be determine the value of 435 Stradbrook, deduct from it the value of the parking lot, and the combined value is the economic unit.
Okay, so you, in your brief here today, so on this particular item number on our agenda, you do not have a value against the property, and I understand your reasons. Yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Just clarifying that for everybody. All right. Okay, Mr. Spacek, do you have any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Ms. McFadden, any questions?
I do have a question. Mr. Newman, is there any signage on any of these businesses that indicates that there's parking available on Pulford behind?
So I don't believe there is, and I walked by there the other day, but wasn't alert enough for that. I don't believe there is because generally speaking, the parking stalls are assigned through the leases. There is customer parking in the front of the buildings, I'll use the phrase. And I think this is primarily, but not exclusively, intended to be for staff. But I'm really sorry I can't answer that question. I should know. My bad.
Well, it does help to know that it's primarily intended for staff. Okay. Thank you. I think that's all my questions.
Mr. Whitbread.
Yes. Pardon me. Mr. Newman, is it still the same owner of all three properties?
Yes.
Okay. And typically, if you want to change something in the roles of the class or liability, it would be the owner that would ask the city to do that. Is that not true?
I think that is true frequently. I think sometimes a tenant who believes they're entitled to an exemption, for example, might be able to make that request. But a lot of the time, I think you're right. The initiative comes through ownership.
And it's not the city's initiative to make that change on their own, is it?
I think they would agree with that view. Having said that, sometimes they do take the initiative, but generally, there's, frankly, there's a lot for them to keep track of.
Yes. So you're asking the board to make that decision. Rather than put it on the city or put it on the owner, you want this board to make the decision to change the role apportionment. In other words, roll three properties into two properties. It's like the value of three properties into two properties. Is that correct?
I guess it is ultimately, yes.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you.
Cynthia,
Go ahead, Linda. Yeah.
sorry, I just have a follow-up question. Is there an application process for doing this? Like has this, so you're telling us that this has not been asked for?
So to my knowledge, there certainly is an application process for exemptions, but that's
Right.
not what we're talking about, but there is for that. Here, in terms of the concept of economic unit and having an allocation of two properties allocated because they're an economic unit, to the best of my knowledge, there is no application process. There's no formal application process for that. Certainly, there's nothing to stop somebody from writing a letter to the city assessor saying, would you please do the following?
But that hasn't been done in this case.
Other than through this application, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, Mr. Newman. So you mentioned that in your experience that if there was a back lane separating the parking lot, that it generally didn't go on the same roll. So there are two, the way, but in looking at that and in my recollection of being in that area, there's a back lane on two sides of that parking lot. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a back lane that runs north-south, and there's a back lane that runs east-west.
Okay, so yeah, so it's actually separated by a lane on two sides of it from both businesses, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and Is there any charge for parking? Like if it like, is there anything that stops me if I'm not going to those businesses? Is there, do I have to pay to park there, or can anyone park there for free, or is there a charge for everybody? How does that work?
Again, the parking is assigned, and I have been in the lot. It is signed noting that it is reserved and it is identified by tenants. At the same time, the lot is controlled by Impark, so there is a sign there, but the difficulty is you may go to the lot and you're gonna find that the stalls are all assigned to tenants, but it's controlled through Impark.
But is there a charge?
Well, there is a charge under some of the leases, which I'll get to the detail of.
But if I pulled in there to park, do I have to pay?
If you could find a stall that's not assigned, I think the answer is yes.
Oh, okay, the one that's not assigned to the businesses. So
Right.
if I'm a customer of the businesses, am I allowed to park in one of their assigned stalls? Is that how this is supposed to work?
In theory, yes.
Yeah, okay. And finally, as we know that there's quite a bit of commercial business in Osborne Village. There's many businesses are up on the second or third story. There doesn't seem to be much parking assigned to a lot of the buildings there. Would that be correct?
I think that is true. And I think you have to start to go a little further afield. So that there are surface lots in the area behind, like you don't see them when you go down Osborne, because of course you're in the canyon, I'll call it, of the buildings. But there are lots in behind a number of the buildings. And the other thing I would say is a lot of these buildings have been there for, since the 1900s. So they're grandfathered to a significant extent.
Okay, these both the two properties that you're talking about on Stradbrook and Osborne today are newer builds, correct?
Well, they're actually, they are in relative terms
Yeah,
newer.
newer than, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That's all I had.
I
Okay,
have-
Mr.
Madam Chair?
Oh,
Madam
yes,
Chair?
Mr. Whitbread, yeah,
May I jump back in?
yes.
Mr. Newman, I'm thinking about this and I'm looking at the three properties because I've reviewed them all. The net value, if you agree to the 1007 as an example here, is going to be the same at the end of the day to the owner. So why do this?
Well, I think the starting point is that when you say the values will be the same, I don't agree with the assessor's values. So the combined value at the end of the day will be different.
Let me clarify then. Depending on what the value is agreed upon, removing that 1 million from one of the properties is still just going to be the same value at the end of the day, is it not? Depending on
For the parking lot, it will be,
yes,
but it won't be for the adjacent commercial property is the position I will put to you.
because you're going to deduct the parking lot from that building.
Exactly.
Right. But if you net all three properties at the end of the day, your value will be the same as what it's going to be.
Assuming you have the correct starting value for
Yeah.
each of the properties,
Yeah.
then you're right. At the end of the day, it's the same. But the key, of course, is having the correct starting value.
Okay, so come back to my question. Why do this?
Because I don't think the starting values on the commercial properties are correct.
Okay, all right, we'll keep going. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Spacek, any need for summation on this one?
No summation, thank you very much.
Mr. Newman?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the next item on the docket this morning is 130 Osborne Street.
I'm gonna
So,
sneak out, thank you, everyone.
thanks, Mr. Spacek. So, Mr. Pontanilla, I believe this one is yours, so please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're all ready to proceed?
Yes,
Okay, so up next we have file 24-3558. The roll number is 1203-176-4100. The address is 130 Osborne Street. The 2025 assessment has gone out at $1,979,000. And we do have this building pucked as a CMRNS, neighborhood shopping center. It's a one building roll, 3 premises associated, a year built of 1916 with an effective year built of 1950 to 1960. And we have a land area of 6,681 square feet and a leasable area total of 4,740 square feet. On page 2, I have included some overhead pad eye view images of the subject property. On page 3, I have included an overhead pictometry view of the subject property. On page 4, I have a south-facing view and a west-facing view of the subject property. And then on page 5, I do have some Google Street View images of the subject property from the 2023 map overlay. We have received requests for income and expense information, so we're okay there. We do have a sale for the subject property. This was the multi-role sale that we're all familiar with and have been discussing this morning so far. And so it would have been $4,250,000 for the combined 130 Osborne, 435 Stradbrook, and 119 Pulford. We do have some subject lease information. So we do have the unit 130, it's a restaurant. We do have a lease beginning in 2022 for 1,447 square feet at a net rate of $24.50 per square foot. Unit 132, that's another restaurant that we have with a lease beginning in 2019 for 1,173 square feet at $29.99 per square foot. And unit 134, I believe that's a optical retail store. We have a lease from 2019 for 2,033 square feet at $28 per square foot. I have included a list of market data information. So this rent comparables are from the same market region as the subject property, market region 7. I did try to bracket between 1,000 square feet and 2,500 square feet. And so we can see there that we do have a list of comparable properties there. And then we do have a lease ranging from $19 at the lower end up to just over $30 at the higher end per square foot. On page 8, I do have the subject properties income stream. And so we can see there, we do have it broken up into the 3 units that we were speaking about. On the top unit we have is a C4 restaurant at 1,500 square feet at $30.75 per square foot. The second premise we have is another C4 restaurant. We have that at 1,200 square feet at $31.42 per square foot. And then we have the optical store at 2,040 square feet at $22.30 per square foot. The total potential rent that we have is $129,321. And if we divide that by the total area of 4,740 square feet, we do have a blended rate of $27.28 per square foot for the subject property. And then from there, we do have model parameters for vacancy of 4%, a 3% expense rate, and a $9 shortfall per square foot. And that brings us to our net operating income of $118,718. And then we have that capitalized at a 6% cap rate for a total assessed value of $1,979,000. Following that, we do have an income value summary of the information provided. And then on page 10, we do have some information in regards to the cap rates being applied. Some information for the city of Winnipeg's and the 3 outside sources for cap rate information. On page 11, we do have the Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. And then on page 12, and taking us to the end of the brief, is the subject property's income and expense information. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Newman, any questions?
Yes, the property's located obviously in the Osborne Village area.
Correct.
When I look at your page 10, those are the cap rates.
Yep.
And when I come back to your page 8, everything on page 8 is set by the model, correct?
Correct.
And so, and when we come back to page 10, which is your cap rate chart,
Yes.
in my experience, the city never presents actual sales to support capitalization rate conclusions. Any idea why that is? Let me rephrase. Never in the context, in my experience, for retail properties. They do to some extent for multifamily, but for retail, never presents capitalization rate, actual sales to support the rates. Why is that?
Well, from my understanding, some of the property types that we have within our retail portfolio are a little more volatile than some of the other property types. In regards to retail and restaurant operations, there is a bit difference in the turnover for those property types. And so my understanding is that we provide a sample of the more stable property sales that we have for retail, and then we provide the cap rates for them. And so the information you see there is compiled from the information we have internally on those property types for their cap rates.
Well, and the information you provide, looking at your page 10, to be clear.
Yep.
There are essentially 6 columns. One is the property type, the other is the City of Winnipeg property type code. Then you've got the City of Winnipeg 20th and 80th percentiles. And
That's
then
correct.
you've got information from the 3 brokers, Colliers, CBRE, and Cushman Wakefield.
That's
so
correct.
The reality is the only information that's coming from the city is that second column, third column rather, which shows the 20th and 80th percentile.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, you made the comment earlier that you recognize that some types of retail are more volatile. And then you went on to talk about restaurants. And I take it by that you're recognizing that restaurants come and go, they fail, they turn over, they're more volatile from that perspective. I think that's what you meant.
Yes, that's a fair assessment.
And of course, with volatility and loss of tenant and turnover, that's a risk factor that an investor will take into account. Agreed?
We can agree on that.
And can we agree as well that an investor will see greater risk in a facility that is weighted towards restaurants than an investor would see with a government lease or a City of Winnipeg lease, for example?
That's a fair assessment.
And so notwithstanding that type of consideration, the model has decided that this property should get a 6% capitalization rate, and it's got 2 restaurants located in it. Any idea why the model decides this property should get 6%? Is it the size?
Size is a factor, the location is a factor, and also we have it as a neighborhood shopping center. So the neighborhood shopping center captures both retail and restaurant operations within the property type. If we'd been talking about a commercial retail freestanding restaurant, it would have its modeled cap rates accordingly. So we had it as a neighborhood shopping center.
And if it was a commercial freestanding restaurant, I'm taking it that the capitalization rate would be higher.
It would be different. It's difficult to say exactly what it would be, but we have different property types.
Okay. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
Yes. When I go to the financial statements.
Yep.
I see a parking revenue, $19,829 for the year.
That's correct.
Would that indicate to us then that Mr. Newman's statements are accurate in this business does consider rent from the Pulford Street parking lot. You agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, that there is some parking revenue there, so that is the indication that it would be from that. That's a fair assessment.
Okay, thank you for that. Have you visited the properties?
I've driven by. I haven't visited internally for any inspections, but I'm familiar with the neighborhood and I have driven by them, so I'm aware of the orientation of the subject properties.
And are you, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to finish like in relation to all three, to 435, 130, and 119 Pulford.
Yeah, understood. So are you aware of the effective date being 1950, 1960, and looking at those properties, it looks like something's been done to those properties to take
Yes.
it even beyond that. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that.
So can you make an estimation of what that effective date might be based on those improvements?
I believe that's the effective date we currently have on it. So the effective date of 1950, 1960, that's what we have in place at the moment. There has been some work that has been done on the property in the exterior. But it's been captured in our records that we have it with that effective date we have in place. So there hasn't been any adjustment in other words, to answer your question, the information that we have on, that's the record that we have for the effective date.
Right.
The permit work that was done for the exterior, that's just been captured in the income stream. No adjustments have been made extra for that work, if that's the question.
That's kind of where I was going.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, no, it's just it was work that was done. We have the permit information. I did review it. But it wouldn't be major enough to require any sort of value adjustment for that.
Understood. Does this building have a heritage designation?
As far as I'm aware, it does not have a heritage designation.
Okay, because originally it was built in 1916, is that correct?
That's what we have on our records. That's correct.
Okay, okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Ms. McFadden.
My questions have been asked and answered. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have no questions. So Mr. Newman, please proceed with your presentation.
And I will say to you that I will take a couple extra minutes on this one to present some greater detail. I won't repeat it in the later ones, in the interest of efficiency.
Okay, thank you.
So you've heard lots about this property already. And I'm at page 2 of my brief now. We know it's driven by an average rent of $27.28 a square foot. Ultimately, the real question here, there is a small issue about the rent. We're a couple of $1,000s apart on the gross potential income, actually about $1,800. But the real issue ultimately is the capitalization rate. So I'll just say that at the outset, just to help orient you in terms of where we're going. On page 2 of my brief, I talk about Osborne Village. It's an area with high turnover, frequent closure of businesses, lots of crime, homelessness, panhandling, and safety issues. That's an important issue in assessing the risk of properties in the area. As the assessor has acknowledged, volatility, depending on the retail use, can be important. These are small businesses operating in this building and in this area. They come, they go, because regrettably their businesses fail sometimes. Down at the bottom of page 2, you can see a reference to the actual rents in place create potential income of $127,565. Nonetheless, I end up, and I say to you, I think that might be inducement loaded a little bit. The assessor's at 129,321. I'm at 127,565. That's why I say it's approximately $1,800 difference. That's not the key issue. So now let's talk about the parking lot. And Mr. Whitbread, you noted that there is in the financial statement the reference to some parking revenue, and absolutely there is. And as I told you earlier, we're not dodging or trying to exclude that parking revenue. We are capturing it, not in this property, but in Stradbrook, but we are capturing it. So what you see on page 3 is a listing of the leases that 130 Osborne and its sister building at 435 Stradbrook are obligated to provide parking to the tenants. And some of them are with charge, some of them are without charge. It all depends. So, 132 Osborne, 134 Osborne, both in the 130 Osborne building. You can see that there's an obligation to 2 reserved stalls for 132 at 132 a month per stall. There's an obligation for 134 to provide 4 parking stalls. No cost is stipulated in that lease. Then we move to the buildings at the premises at 435 Stradbrook. You can see that Mary Brown's 3 parking stalls at prevailing market rates. Tokyo Smoke, 4 stalls at no cost to the tenant, with an option to request additional reserve parking, in which case, if it's available, it would be provided at a cost. The lease for Seychelles Indoor Cycling, 4 parking stalls. The lease for Pinky's Bake Shop, 2 parking stalls, no cost. The lease for Strata Personal Spa, 2 stalls at a charge. So I say to you, there's 30 stalls, 21 of the stalls are committed through these obligations. Some of them pay, some of them don't pay. I referenced the financial statement of $19,829. And again, I'll come to deal with that. Then in the section on page 4 below where I just was, I start to talk about the evidence I presented to you already in relation to the economic unit concept. I won't repeat it in any detail other than to say the board in a decision 570 Portage and 280 Young, which I attached, the board again this year in October of this year relating to 570 Portage and 280 Young, determined the value of the commercial property and then subtracted the value of the adjacent parking lot, the zoning bylaw, the Forks decision, the hotels, all of which you've heard about already. And so that's the parking lot story, and I'll stop there. Now I want to come to capitalization rates. So, and I have said to prior panels that I have appeared before that I respect the fact that the panel members are experienced. You're not new to this. You've heard lots of presentations. You've come to learn a lot about the real estate market, and you recognize that there's no such thing as a single capitalization rate that's correct. What there is a spectrum. And in many ways, your task is to determine where does this particular building fit into that spectrum. That's really the task you have to determine. And I say to you that in the context of this building, it does not fit at 6%. And now let me turn to address a number of matters, which again, I will address in greater detail on this property and not repeat in the same detail on the later ones. So the brokers helpfully provide definitions about retail properties. You see Cushman, a strip plaza anchored. The concept there is that they've got a food store or a drugstore tenant. Retailers, smaller service type retailers, like to congregate in shopping centers that are anchored by a grocery store, Safeway, Sobeys, Save-On, etc., by a Shoppers Drug Mart or another large chain drugstore, because they bring traffic. And of course, the other retailers in the strip mall, in the neighborhood shopping center, they benefit from that. But they also recognize there are strip plazas that are non-anchored. Collier's definition of a neighborhood or strip center, again, often anchored by smaller supermarkets, drugstores, discount stores, with a mix of smaller attached retailers. So what are capitalization rates? It's the return the investor needs relative to the risk the investor is undertaking in order to make the investment. But it also takes into account returns available in alternative investments. If I can buy the big five bank stock and get a dividend of 6% a year, am I going to buy real estate with the risk associated with what might be a 3% return in the hope that over owning it for 25 or 30 years, maybe it will increase in value? That's an individual decision for investors, but they take into account available other returns. The economic climate, as we came out of COVID, and I remember as we were here in the fall of 2022, summer and fall of 22, doing the 2023 assessment cycle with an April 1, 2021 reference date. At that point, we'd had essentially 1 year's experience with COVID. We didn't know where it was going to go. We didn't know what the fallout would be. Here we are 2 years later in terms of the reference date. And so we've had the ability now to see some of the things that have happened. And again, I'm speaking generally. What's happened in the retail world is a lot of stores have closed. Retail's become difficult. A lot of big chains have closed. And I list those on page 6 and on to page 7. And I tell you that only to put in your mind the concept that retail has become tough. Always tough, but tougher still, I will say to you. Then we have the brokerage firms who publish rates that we've seen and you're well familiar with. We look at what Colliers, Cushman, and CBRE have to say. I will say to you, it's my belief that the brokerage studies are typically based on sales of better, top quality investment grade assets. Colliers includes closing costs, which has the effect of inflating the purchase price and reducing the capitalization rates on the rates they quote. It's a good marketing tool for them to do that. And then I go to page 7 and on to page 8. And there are the assessor's charts, which again, you're well familiar with. And what's interesting to me is that generally speaking, first of all, the assessor's chart, which used to contain 5 categories, regional, power center, community, neighborhood, and strip, is now down to 3 categories. And it looks like power center, neighborhood, and maybe community have been conflated into a single category. And of course, very important in extracting those numbers is how much of that is sales of grocery anchored or drugstore anchored shopping centers. Because again, those are always going to have the better and lower capitalization rates. So what I say to you generally is that if you look at what the brokers have done, generally their rates have increased. So for example, Colliers at the high end, they've gone up by 25 basis points between the 2 cycles. CBRE, they've actually gone up at the low end by 25 basis points. And at the high end, at least on power and neighborhood, they seem to have come down, at least on strip. And then Cushman Wakefield, they seem to have come up across the board, 75 basis points on strip and 25 basis points on at the high end on strip. But interestingly enough, the city study on their 20th and 80th percentiles has come down across the board compared to where they were in 2021. One observation I can make is that for a significant portion of the time frame leading up to April 1 of 2023, we had historically low interest rates. And let us not lose sight for a second of the fact that interest rates drive the real estate economy. And so when you've got sales in the first year, April 1 of 21 to April 1 of 22, preceding the increase in the interest rates, you're gonna have lower cap rates, but then interest rates jump up. So the other thing I bring to your attention, Altus has published, as the brokers publish, Altus has published an extensive capitalization rate study. And I reproduce a portion of it on my page 9. And you can see what they have done is they have looked at a variety of properties, 13 properties throughout Winnipeg. Some of them are larger, some of them are smaller. You can see the average capitalization rate is 6.83%. The median is 6.75. And they then categorize those on page 10. They consider retail top quality to be in the range of 6.5 to 7, retail standard quality to be 7 to 7.5, and they note that top quality retail would be grocery or drug anchored strip and neighborhood shopping centers, which the subject property is not, of course. And so from my perspective, it's going to fall into the retail standard quality. Quality and strength of covenant, again, something that an investor always assesses. Who's my tenant? Is it one of the banks? Is it a government? Or is it the local pizza guy who's trying to make a living? The local pizza guy brings with it more risk. And you see that ultimately at page 11, I list attributes of buildings and I reference a variety of criteria that an investor will take into account. The quality of the tenancy, national versus small local, nature of the tenancy, grocery, drugstore anchored as opposed to small local, location, quality of site, quality of development. And Mr. Whitbread, you asked of the assessor that the buildings look newer than 1916, and they do. They've been reskinned, obviously, and they've had their exterior redone. Neighborhood demographics. I'm going to speak more about that, but neighborhood demographics in the Osborne area have become difficult. Homelessness, safety issues, and I'll speak more to that. I'll show you a series of articles about things that have gone on. Quality of covenant, small local versus national. So you look at all those things, and an investor will take all that into account in deciding what they're going to do and how much they're prepared to pay, which is ultimately the capitalization rate. Interest rates, just for a moment on that, as I said to you a couple of moments ago, interest rates are the engine that drives the real estate economy, and they are very important. And as we see on page 13, the Bank of Canada's benchmark interest rate moved up starting in 2022 by 425 basis points. And so if you're doing a deal in 22 or first part of 23, you're looking at much higher interest rates. So page 15, my conclusions. 6% is too low. Restaurant properties in particular have faced difficult times coming out of COVID, difficult to get staff. Everything has increased in price. It puts their operations at greater risk. And on page 16, I say to you, I'm selecting 7%. I'll show you a spreadsheet in a moment. Osborne Village suffers from significant turnover. I'm going to turn some pages in a moment. Altus notes standard quality real estate cap rate 7 to 7.5. Rents here arguably are a little bit above market. The building's old, although a new facade is on it, but the bones are still old. And so I come up with a value of $1,673,000. And I tell you the parking lot will be taken into account in the valuation of 435 Osborne. I'll just turn pages now, page 17. I think you've seen that picture before. It's the new facade. Page 18, it actually gives you all three properties, 130 Osborne in the foreground, right half of the page, 435 Stradbrook immediately behind it and above, and then Pulford to the left. 435 Stradbrook. 130 Osborne before the new facade. The Pulford value at page 21. The assessor's calculation of value at page 22. Page 24 is my calculation of value. And again, what I said to you at the outset is we've got a slight difference in gross potential income, about $1,800, $129,321 by the assessor, $127,565 by me. Everything else is the same, except the capitalization rate is higher. Page 25 is the rent roll. Page 26 was a set of comparables from another property that I did earlier at 108 Osborne. 27, 28 are the financial statement. Again, the parking revenue is noted here, but we'll take it into account in the context of the other property. Then starting at page 29, you get the same material I've walked you through already in the context of the economic unit, so I'm not going to repeat any of that. Page 40, what we get at page 40 and following is a whole series of articles about things going on in the Osborne Village. Concerns that residents are expressing, concerns that merchants are expressing. If you look at page 42, concerns about derelict buildings, people not wanting to be in the area when they consider it to be unsafe. If you jump ahead to page 45, here's an article about vacancies cropping up in the neighborhood. Has Osborne Village lost its cool? On page 46, a reference to restaurant closures, Segovia closing, that was in the village. Hermanos, not in the village, but closing as well. On page 47, into the music, closing. Page 48, somebody expressing the view at the bottom of the article. This just isn't the cool element to the neighborhood anymore. Page 49, again, Segovia closing. Page 51 rather, Hermanos closing. At page 52, Stella's Cafe closing. So lots of turnover, lots of risk with restaurants, as the assessor noted. The gas station theater needing now for safety related issues. It's overrun with drug use. It's needing to protect its patrons. It's going to have to construct, I'll use the word, it's going to fence in its courtyard because of these concerns. So all of these concerns impact the area. Page 61, another merchant leaving. Anyways, you get my point. Starbucks left as well. You get my point. So, and again, I've taken some time on this one. I won't repeat, I promise. But you have my presentation and you have my requested value of $1,673,000. Primary difference is the capitalization rate. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pontonia, any questions?
Yes, just a few questions. First, in regards to the rental rates that are being applied to the subject property, on page 26, you noted that you had the rental comparables used in another presentation. Did those influence the rental rates that you applied ultimately, or are you just ultimately going down to the actuals that are being declared on by the income statement?
Well, they influenced in the sense that I felt ultimately that the actuals, and again, remember, there's only $1,800 difference. I felt the actuals were in the range, and so I just went with the actuals.
Okay, fair enough. And in regards to the 7% cap rate, so that 7%, was that just a cap rate chosen based on the information in the Altus? Or I guess it was, is it fair to say that the cap rate applied was influenced by the presentation on the Altus cap rates that you had in your brief?
It was to some extent, but it was also influenced by The things I said about the area and crime and safety and homelessness, about restaurants and turnover. It was a combination of a variety of things. And also, and I didn't say this, I did talk about interest rates going up. Reality is that in April of 2023, any one of us, if we had the money, could buy a GIC north of 5%. So interest rates were very high. The returns on alternative investments were quite good at that point in time. And again, that's going to influence capitalization rates and that's going to push them up. So it's all of those things.
Okay. And just a final question in relation to that. That 7% that was being given for the range for the standard, I believe it was worded, or average property types. Does that take into account any forward-facing regional retail stores in terms of its location? Or is there no differentiation between inner retail operations and then regional street retail operations?
So that study, that analysis has a spectrum of different locations and sites.
Yep.
Some of them are certainly what I'll call small strip type centers on streets like Corden or Ellis or St. Mary's Road. So some of them are certainly smaller in size. They're not all big ones.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden, any questions?
Just an observation. So, Mr. Newman, I note that the difference in the actual gross potential rent doesn't seem to be related to the actual rent number. It's related to the size of the properties. You have a total leasable area of about 4653 versus the city's 4740. Has there been an effort to resolve that?
There hasn't been on my part. I think at the end of the day, I think it's probably a combination of those factors. The assessor, of course, is using the model. And so the model is kicking up slightly different rates for the spaces. And so depending
But the average rate is the same for both, right? The average rate each of you has used is the same. 27.28. I believe.
Close, 2741 says my calculator, but close enough. But I take your point. I didn't arrive at it that way. I think that's just, as it turns out, perhaps a good coincidence, and it means we're actually very close.
Okay, and the $19,000 shown on the income statement as the parking revenue, you have not included that in your analysis because you're going to add it to the Stradbrook.
And when you see
Correct?
my spreadsheet, yes, when you see my spreadsheet on the next one, you'll see it added in.
Okay. Oh, one last question. So the properties you're talking about at 570 Portage and 280 Yonge, are those parking lots that are part of the same economic unit? Are they actually separated by lanes?
Yes.
They are.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think you may have answered that before and I missed it, but thank you.
Hey, Mr. Whitbread.
I'm okay. I have no questions. Thank you.
And I have no questions. So Mr. Pontini, any need for summation on this one?
No need for summation. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Newman?
I'm good as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just before we move on to 435 Stradbrook, and then after that property, we'll take a short break. I just been notified that item number 5 on the agenda on the docket today and item number 6 have both been withdrawn. That's correct, gentlemen?
Yes, I was going to mention something earlier, but I thought once we got to the roll number, I'd bring it up at that moment. So
yeah, I just was advised now. So
Sure.
Let's just confirm that. Mr. Newman, that's correct from your viewpoint as well?
Those should be 910 Wall and 897 Corden.
That's correct, yes.
Yes,
Okay.
I agree.
All right, good. So that everyone knows those two are withdrawn. Okay. So let's move on to item number 3 on the docket, 435 Stradbrook. So Mr. Pontinia, please proceed when you're ready.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just opening up my documents. Okay, I believe I am ready to go. So up next, we have file 24-3560. The roll number is 1203-176-6100. The address is 435 Stradbrook Avenue. The 2025 assessment has gone out at $3,654,000. This is also a neighborhood shopping center. We do have one building for the subject property with 5 premises associated, and it's a 1-story building. We have an actual year built and an effective year built of 1971. A land area of 24,417 square feet. Excuse me, and a leasable area of 11,017 square feet. On page 2, I have included the pad eye view image of the subject property. On page 3, we do have the overhead view of the subject property. On page 4, we do have the south-facing view and the west-facing view of the subject property. And then on page 5 and page 6, we do have some images of the subject property from the Google Street View 2023 map overlay update. We have received requests for income and expense information, so we're okay there. Once again, we have the sale showing of the multi-roll sale for all 3 subject properties, or all 3 properties that we're speaking of, at $4,250,000. And then we do have some lease information there that's being shown. So we can see unit 437 is achieving a rate of $31 per square foot. Unit 437-2 at $32 per square foot. 437-3 at $16 per square foot. 439 at $25 per square foot. And 445 at $26 per square foot. For the rental comparables that I've included, these comparables are from within the market region of the subject property. And so we do have a range of areas ranging from, it looks to be 800 square feet at the lower end up to just over 2,700 square feet at the higher end. And then we do have rental rates that range from, it looks to be $20 at the lower end up to just over $30 or $30 even actually at the higher end. On page 9, we do have the income stream for the subject property. So we'll note that we have the premises that we have with the tenants in place, and then we do have rental rates ranging from $8.66 at the lower end for the premise or for the tenant at 33,040 square feet, up to $28 at the higher end for the tenant at 949 square feet. The total potential rent given is $237,711. And if we take that value, 237,711, and divide it by the total area, we get a modeled rate of $21.58 per square foot. And then from there, we do have the model parameters for vacancy, for the expense rate, and for the shortfall. That brings us to a net operating income of $217,391. And then we have the modeled cap rate of 5.95%, which brings us to our total assessed value of $3,654,000. On page 10, I do have the income value summary for the information that I've previously provided. On page 11, it's the cap rate information for some of the information that we've spoken about. On page 12, we do have the Municipal Assessment Act excerpts, some that pertain to the work we're doing here. And then on page 13, and taking us to the end of the brief, is the subject properties income and expense information. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman.
Page 9 of your brief, that's the calculation of value, all model driven.
All model driven, correct.
And so the model says that this building of 11,017 square feet should have a 5.95 80% capitalization rate.
That's
Any
correct.
sense of how the model arrives at that?
It would have been the similar inputs as to 130 Osborne. We can see that the cap rates are fairly close between 5.95 and 6. So similar neighborhood influences would have been at play. We do have size factors and that are at play. So it would have been all the same inputs as what would have derived the other cap rate for Osborne.
And this property has one restaurant, Mary Brown's.
Just give me 1 second and look at the tenant list. Yes, I believe so.
And then Pinky's Bake Shop is obviously a bakery.
It's
Okay.
yes, that's correct.
So and the 5.95% capitalization rate, looking at your page 11,
Yep.
which is cap rate chart, that puts it truly among very close to the 20th percentiles, which would suggest it's amongst the very best of the retail properties in the city of Winnipeg.
That's where the suggestion would be, correct.
Right. And do you think this is among the very best of the retail properties in the city of Winnipeg?
I mean, it's not outside of the range of the 20th and 80th percentiles, so it wouldn't be extraordinary. At 5.95%. It is located in a very dense location, in the location where it is, just off Osborne there. We're on the corner of Osborne and Stradbrook, so it might be a little low. It might be, it might not be necessarily where maybe some of the other ones are, but again, it's not outside of the extraordinary range.
Well, and you started to say it's in the range of the 20th and 80th percentiles, and obviously I'd be a lot happier if it were at the high end of the range rather than the low end of the range.
Of course.
That's what's brought us here, so we'll leave
Yes.
it at 8. All right, I think those are my questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Whitbread.
Well, I'm looking at the page 13, the financials.
Yep.
And in this case, we don't show any parking revenue for this property.
That's correct.
And that's in spite of Mr. Newman's indication that the revenue is shared. Can you explain that?
I can't. No, it's this is just what the information I have in front of me, so
Okay, we'll wait for Mr. Newman then.
thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Ms. McFadden, any questions?
Yes, Mr. Pontanilla, it's obvious but from the pictures that despite the property description saying there are 0 parking spots, that there are parking spots outside of this building for patrons in front of it.
Yes, that's correct.
And in your opinion, would that make any difference to the valuation if parking was included in that valuation?
I mean, we don't have a separate revenue for parking for the income stream, if that's the question.
No, that's not the question, actually. What I'm saying is, does the availability of parking in this particular location increase the value of that property? The available parking for patrons.
I mean, it would be captured in the income stream, presumably, that we have in place. So that would be, that would capture both the parking lot and the improvement or the building that we have. It would all be captured in the income stream.
The rents that they're paying.
Yeah, exactly. That would all be captured as to why the rents may be higher on some of the premises, and then the cap rate that's being applied and all those factors. So
it would also affect the cap rate.
It could affect the cap rate. I mean, based on the fact that there is the size of the parcel, that would definitely have an effect. So yeah.
In this particular location in Osborne Village, it's fairly unusual that there would be separate parking available for clients. Is that not correct?
It's a little difficult to say with confidence as to the activities, as I'm not a business owner on Osborne, so it's hard to say. But being a city resident, I mean, it would appear to be, yes, based on the strip on Osborne, that not all the buildings there have necessarily parking lots attached to them, if we can put it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the question about the cap rate.
Sure.
So you had answered about the location and the density in Osborne Village, etc. Would the age, this building is effective age is newer than the property we heard previously. Would the model takes that into account as well, correct? The
Yes, that's correct. Yep,
effective age. Yeah.
it takes it
Okay.
into account.
Yes, thank you. Okay, Mr. Newman, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. And again, I will abbreviate because I think the issues have become quite clear to you. Let me go to my page 3. Again, I talk about the parking lot. I list the tenants. I list the obligations of the landlord. I'll come back to that. But I do tell you that the property manager, and as you've seen, records parking revenue in the statement for 130 Osborne. I'm telling you, I'm bringing it into account in the context of this property, and I'll show you that in the spreadsheet in a few moments. We're back to the capitalization rate issue. Again, I will abbreviate. Not an anchored by drugstore or grocery store. It's got food related to some extent, food, cannabis, bakery, restaurant, to some extent. So again, what's going on in Osborne Village? Where should this building fall in the spectrum? Come back to the Altus study, pages 9 and 10 of my report. I would consider this to be a retail standard quality site. Again, you can see their average is 6.83, their median is 6.75. Again, as I've said to you, Osborne has had some issues, continues to have some issues, increasing interest rates, pages 12 and 13 of the brief. So we get to my page 16. These are my conclusions. And actually, before that, let me show you the spreadsheet, page 22. So there's potential gross income, and I actually am looking at it. I see there's an error because my intention was to accept the assessor's gross potential income of 237,711, and somehow that became 231,711. So it's $6,000 short. But you can see I've otherwise tracked the assessor's criteria. But then you will see the fourth number from the bottom, $19,829. That's the revenue recorded in the 130 Osborne financial statement as relating to the parking. So I'm bringing the revenue into account. And I want to be crystal clear on something. What I'm not bringing into account is the expenses associated with that lot. And so, for example, there's a tax bill associated with that lot. There will be snow clearing associated with that lot. Those expenses are detailed in the financial statement for 130 Osborne. I quite conservatively, in my opinion, have not brought those expenses into account. So, and essentially, the full parking revenue without reduction is being brought into this calculation, and the taxes relating to Pulford, which were $19,723 in 2022, are not being captured. None of those expenses are being captured. So again, back to my spreadsheet. And actually, in this brief, I actually put, so page 22 is my spreadsheet. You can see the $19,829 of parking income. If you look at page 23, There's the financial statement for 130 Osborne. You can see the parking revenue, $19,829. If you look down the page, in the left-hand column are ledger account numbers. If you look at ledger account 4,500, you can see the property taxes for Pulford. As I said a few moments ago, that's not being taken into account. And so I come back to my spreadsheet on 22. So the 19,829 is brought into revenue. The net operating income is 231,599. You could increase that by $6,000 because I made the mistake. And the full 6,000 wouldn't come through to the bottom line because of vacancy and the 3%, but we can use that. So once you add in the income, the revenue from the parking lot, I get a net operating income of $231,599. If I add $6,000 to it, I'm going to get $237,599. And if I cap that at 7%, I'm going to get $3,394,271. And I will say that again and more slowly. So I'm adding $6,000 to the NOI, which becomes $237,599. Capitalizing at 7 becomes $3,394,271. And then what I would do is I would subtract from that $1,007,000. And therefore I would say to you that the value of 435 Stradbrook should be $2,387,271. So
Sorry, can you say that again, Mr. Newman?
yes,
The final value.
$2,387,271.
Thank you.
And that discussion is found at page 16 of my brief. And again, as I say to you, the key issue here is ultimately the capitalization rate and the concept of the single economic unit. In my brief, I have the same series of articles about issues and difficulties in the Osborne Village area. I've taken you through that. I won't repeat. And you've got the same set of materials on economic unit. I've taken you through that. I won't repeat. And so that can complete my submission, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pontier, on the questions.
Just a few. So just to confirm, the rental rate is no longer in dispute, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then for the cap rate was derived from the information in regards to the Altus presentation for choosing the 7% cap rate, correct?
Together with the other factors, location, issues in the Osborne Village area, rising interest rates. It's the combination of things, but yes.
Okay, and then one last question in regards to the parking lot. I believe that perhaps the question was asked earlier for Osborne, I'm not sure, but for 435 Stradbrook, is there any signage on any of the doors directing customers to the overflow parking lot in the back? Is there any direction for that, or?
That's the one where mea culpa said, my bad.
Okay.
I think member McFadden asked me that question.
Yeah, I couldn't remember which of the panel members did. Okay, I just wanted to confirm that for Stradbrook as well. Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. McFadden, any questions for Mr. Newman?
I don't have any additional questions. Thank you.
Mr. Whitbread?
Yes. When I look at the financial statements provided on 2324, page 2324 of your brief, do you know if the same line items are used year over year for these financial statements? And for example, I'll just go to items 4500, 01, and 02, where the property taxes are outlined. all of the property taxes for the three properties are deducted from this property. Osborne taxes aren't allocated to Osborne, and you haven't split the or they haven't split the allocation around 119 Pulford. As we know, there is creative accounting, but in this case, do you know if they use these same line items year over year for the balance sheet or the income statement that we have, and put it all under this 435 Stradbrook?
So two things you said that I'll respond to. I think you may have said, and perhaps I misheard, that the taxes for the three properties are on this statement. But it's only the two. It's only Pulford and 130 Osborne.
Correct, yes.
My belief is that the system of ledgers, which is what those account numbers in the left-hand margin are, unless the property manager changes their property management software or their systems, they're going to, in all likelihood, use them from year to year.
Thank you. That answers my question. I'm looking, let's go back up to photos. I think you have them at the beginning of your brief. There's a really good overhead photo I want to find. No, can you go back to the, yes, on page 4 of the assessor's evidence. I'll give you a minute to get there. Are you there?
I am.
So if I look at the L-shaped building, that's the 5 properties on Stradbrook that we're talking about currently. And in front of that, there's a parking lot, and it encompasses both the Stradbrook property and the side of the 103 Osborne or 130 Osborne, doesn't it?
Yes.
And do you know if there are any signs beside the 130 Osborne that indicate that that parking is only for patrons of 130 Osborne?
I don't believe it there are. I think patrons of 130 Osborne can use at least a portion of that lot fronting, I'll call it, 435 Stradbrook.
So they can pretty much go in there and park and go to any of the 3 + 5, 8 building premises that exist, right?
Yes.
Okay. And does that parking lot meet the municipal requirements size-wise for the number of cars for the premises? Do you know that?
I haven't done the calculation, but I would be very surprised if it does, considering the number of premises.
Probably a good thing for us to know if we're going to make a decision to incorporate the parking lot on Pulford into these businesses, wouldn't you think? You're asking us to make a decision on the basis of something we don't really have factual knowledge of then, because I would suggest that if there was enough space for the 8 businesses here, then we might not consider your application for Pulford.
Yeah. So, looking at page 4 of the assessor's brief,
Yeah.
and at the 2 photos, because they're taken at different points in time, but you can do kind of a rough count, and you can see in the top one, you can see 16 cars parked, including the vacant spot right by the number 443 in the top one. So there's 16 cars parked there. And then I would say to you that in front of 130 Osborne, in front of that building, there's probably room for another 4 cars, maybe 5 cars. That's going to get us to approximately 21.
Yeah, because you can't block the lane, right?
I'm not, that's right, because then you've got the lane between the two buildings.
That is correct. Okay, I see that.
Right, so roughly 21, I'm going to say to you. And when you think about the 8 premises, and when you think about, for example, you need, in retail, you need 1 space for each 250 square feet, over a floor area over 2,000 square feet, 1 space minimum. So we've got 20,000 between the two buildings. We've got roughly
15,000, let's say, 15,700.
Yes, 15,700. So for example, if they were all retail, then you'd need 13 spots. They're not all retail. Some of it is restaurant. For the restaurants without a drive-through, and there's no drive-throughs here, you need 1 spot for each 100 square feet of floor area. So the 2 restaurants at 130 Osborne are between them about 2,500 square feet, 1,447 plus 1,173. So I'm going to call that 2,500 square feet. And so in theory, you need about 25 stalls for that. Plus you've got Mary Brown's in 435, which is 1,693 square feet. So I think at the end of the day, I think the answer is there's not enough stalls to meet the zoning requirements in the front lot.
You've answered my question. Thank you, Mr.
But I'll say one other thing.
Sure.
Good, better, best. People love parking.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you. I just had one question. I'm just more of an interest sake, I think. Not sure that it has any will have any bearing on our decision, but I'm just wondering, the property owner themselves have been putting the revenue for the parking lot into the Osborne property, but you've put the parking lot against this property. Is there any particular reason why?
There is. The Stradbrook property is the bigger property with a greater value.
Okay, so that was the reasoning there. Okay.
And frankly, I think the property manager should be putting it into the Stradbrook property, because again, that's the bigger property.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Pontini, any need for summation here?
No need for summation. Thank you.
Mr. Newman?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, before we move on, let's just take a quick 10-minute break. So my clock shows 10:38, so let's come back at about 10:48, okay? Thank you very much. I'm going to call the meeting back to order, and we will now proceed with item 4 on the agenda this morning, which is 1081 Ellis Avenue. So Mr. Pontanilla, please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Up next, we have file 24-3554. The roll number is 1301-139-0100. The address is 1081 Ellis Avenue. The 2025 assessment has gone out at $4,194,000. Once again, we are speaking of a neighborhood shopping center. We have 3 buildings associated with the roll, 4 premises associated with the subject property, and it's a 1-story building. Our actual year built is 1964 and 2023, with an effective year of 1980 to 2023. The total land area is 83,664 square feet. And the total leasable area is 18,667 square feet. On page 2, I have included an overhead view of the subject property. On page 3, I have included the pictometry overhead view of the subject property. On page 4, I have included a south-facing view and a west-facing view of the subject property. And then on page 5 and page 6, I have included the Google Street View images of the subject property. And this would be from the 2024 map overlay. And that's actually on page 7 as well. We have received requests for income and expense information, so we're okay there. We do have a sale from the subject property from 2009 for $1.3 million. And we do have one lease that's generated with the subject property in the brief, and that would be for the Cambrian, for the credit union that's there, and that would be for $32 per square foot. On page 9, I have included some rent comparable information. So for the first list that I have here, this would be from the Market Region 5. This would be C2, so commercial retail premises, neighborhood shopping center, and then retail also with some strip mall information combined in there. And so then we can see that we do have an area that ranges from just over 1,000 square feet at the lower end up to 8,416 square feet at the higher end. And then we do have rents that range from $13 at the lower end up to $24 at the higher end. On page 10, I have included some rent comparable information for banks. And so all of the leases you see here, these are leases for banks that are from across the city. And then we do have areas that range from, it looks to be 3,000 square feet at the lower end up to just over 6,000 square feet at the higher end. Following that on page 11, I do have some citywide comparables for the vehicle service garage that's on the subject property, that's on the roll. And so then we do see a range in areas ranging from, looks to be about 1,380 square feet at the lower end up to 2,960 square feet at the higher end. And then we do have rents that range from $18 or $16 at the lower end up to just over $30 at the higher end. Okay, and then this is where the presentation might be a little off. So what happened was when I was working on this file after I had been assigned the file to begin presenting and putting the information in the brief, there was a technical complication. So you'll notice on page 12 is the income stream that we had for the subject property when the subject property's appeal or when the subject property's 2025 value was solidified in our system. That was how we had it, the income stream set up. So you'll notice on the one side, we do have the neighborhood shopping center. We had 13,347 square feet at $13.13 per square foot. And then we had 4,000 square feet, which would be the bank at $32 per square foot. So then that would give us a total potential rent of $303,246 or a blended rate of $17.48 for the neighborhood shopping center stream. From there, we had a 15% vacancy that was in place. The reason why we had that 15% vacancy is because the big premise at 13,347 square feet, I believe it used to be a Habitat for Humanity is what it was being operated as at one point. It had been, that space had been vacant. So there was a chronic vacancy that was in place. And that's the reason that we had allocated a 15% vacancy. It was to capture the challenges that premise was having in the back. So that's why you see the 15% vacancy in place. From there, that we had the $9 shortfall and the 3% other expense rate that we had. That brought us to the net operating income of $226,608. From there, we had a modeled cap rate of 6.4%. And that brings us to our value for the neighborhood shopping center of $3,541,000. So that would be on the neighborhood shopping center side. For the vehicle service garage, that would be the lube changing business that's there. We had it at 1,320 square feet at a model $26.42 per square foot. That gives us the total potential rent or the total potential income of $34,874. From there, we do have the vacancy model parameters for general vacancy for the vehicle service garage of 2%, a $6 shortfall, and a 3% expense to bring us to a net operating income of $32,993. And then we have a modeled cap rate of 5.05%, which gives us to a value of $653,000. Combining $3,541,000 with $653,000 gets us to our appeal value that it went out at $4,194,000. The reason why it's being presented in this way is because since the appeal went out back in April, I believe it was, when all of the moving parts were taking place, April into June and that whole time. Since that time, there has been some work done on the building that's in the far back. And the building in the far back is no longer being used as a one premise building anymore. It's now been partitioned into two premises. So it's now been split up. So the reason why that's important is because what follows on page 13, when I was putting the brief together, it was generating the information as it's on the roll as of the physical changes that were put in place. So that's why you'll notice on page 13 that we now, instead of having it previously as one space at 13,347 square feet, it's now been split up into two spaces of 4,458 square feet for premise 13224 and 8,889 square feet for premise 309456. So the reason why I'm explaining all this is just to apologize. This is the value that the model is now trying to overlay onto the subject property because of the changes that were in place. It has a different valuation as well. That 15% vacancy has now been changed to the 4% vacancy because there is a tenant now in one of the two spaces that has been partitioned. We do have a tenant that's there now. So I'm not placing any weight on page 13. I want to be clear about that. The appeal value is the $4,194,000 that you see on page 12. That's the value that it went out at when the appeal values were being worked at and when the appeal value was put into place. That was the value that we had at the time. And that's the value that I'm presenting as the value for 1081 Ellis Avenue. So I just wanted to be clear in the explanation that on page 12, when you guys do your reviews, that's the value that we're putting forward as the city as the correct value for the subject property. It was capturing the 15% vacancy in place that we had because of the issues that the tenant in the back was having. And it was originally partitioned between the 13,347 square feet for the space and the 4,000 square feet for the bank. So I hope that's clear that that's the presentation. I couldn't get rid of this. It was a technical issue is sort of what it comes down to. The brief and the way that we do our work, it was generating this output. And so there wasn't a way necessarily to generate the original output that it would have had when the appeal value went out in earlier 2000 of this year. So in 2000 spring, I guess it would be.
Okay, so just to clarify, so page 12.
Yep.
So your original brief, was it broken out in two like this?
So this is how it went out at during the appeal portion of the process. So when the 2025 appeals were originally generated in our systems and we began working with that 2025 value, that's what it would have looked like on page 12. it would have had that information, the 13,347 square feet and the 4,000 square feet for the bank. What happened is that since this has occurred, so it's actually a pretty recent change in the past. So it would have been after the appeal was solidified and it went out and then the process was done, that one of our staff had done the work in the background to partition the space that was in the back, that Habitat for Humanity space. It's no longer one space of 13,347 square feet. It's now been split into two premises. And one of our staff did the work and they split the premises, which removed the vacancy that was in place, because then they
Yeah, no,
they put one of the
understood.
tenants in, yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's why it fuddled the valuation, if we can put it that way. And it was outputting the valuation based on the recent physical changes along with the removal in vacancy. So that's why there's a difference substantially between the 4,194,000 that you see under appeal on page 12. And then on page 13, it shows in the neighborhood shopping
Yeah.
center stream. And then if you go to page 15, it shows a value of 5,311,000. That's where that value difference is coming from, because the vacancy was removed. And there was a slight difference to the valuation now for the neighborhood shopping center as the space was divided into two. It's no longer a rate of $13.13. It'll be somewhere around there because now we have it divided into one space at $12.78 and another space at $15.96. So if you took
Okay.
the median between the two, you're still looking at around $13, but it's slightly changed from what it was. But the big increase in in value, sorry, is the removal of the 15% vacancy. That's
Okay.
really what's driving that big increase that you see difference in value.
Okay,
So
but you're
I-
still
I-
presenting the 4,194,000.
yes. I just
Okay.
want to be clear about that. I just wanted so that when you guys look at the information in the brief, it's clear as to why there's a
Okay.
discrepancy. But I just want to put, as the city, our position is to put forward that value of 4,194,000. That's the value that I'm just seeking to confirm at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Anything else you wanted to mention on this?
No. So if you look at page 14, which is the vehicle service garage, that page hasn't changed from page 12 in the brief on the vehicle service garage side. That page is still relevant. It's the exact same. It was just the neighborhood shopping center stream that changed. So you can still look to that as the output that would cover the vehicle service garage for the income stream for that particular stream. On page 15, it's the income value summary, but that income value summary is showing a revised value that I'm not putting forward. So I'm placing no weight on page 15 as well. And then on page 16, I do have the cap rate information that we've spoken about that we put forward as the city on the city side. On page 17, I do have the Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. And then on page 18, and taking us to the end of the brief, is the subject properties income and expense information. And that's all the information I have to present. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, any questions?
Yes, thank you. Page 1, Mr. Pontanilla, the zoning is M1. What does that
Yes.
mean in the context of retail-related uses? It's not Zone C, it's zoned M1.
I mean, I guess the zoning would call for more industrial, the more industrial use overall within the neighborhood, but I don't have the information in front of me to say exactly what retail is allowed where.
Yeah, and to be clear, and also to be fair to you, I'm not saying you can't have retail-related uses in M1 areas. But certainly it's not as, I'll use the word generous to retail-related uses as C1 or C2 would be. Do you agree?
We can agree to that. Yep.
Okay. So historically, look at your page 3.
Yep.
The building that has the address 1081. That's an old Safeway store. Correct?
At some point, it would have been in the further past. I remembered in my memory as the old Habitat for Humanity, but
Sure.
it could have been a Safeway before that as well.
All right. And then 1085 is the credit union. and
Yes.
1089 is the loop.
That's correct.
And this is at the corner of Ellis and Wall.
Yep.
And as we can see, what I'll call the main building, the 1081 building, it's set back quite far from Ellis, isn't it?
That's correct.
And then if you look at your page 4, there's your west-facing view in the lower half, and then your south-facing view in the upper section. And the two buildings on the front, the Lou building and the Credit Union building, they're going to obstruct the view of the 1081 building to some extent, aren't they?
That's a fair assessment.
So then when we look at your page 6, the lower photo, that's taken from the perspective of Wall Street, correct?
That's correct.
And indeed, it's quite far along Wall in order to get that perspective, isn't it?
That's a fair assessment.
Because if you look at page 4, lower photo, the drive entrance off Wall Street, you can see the building 1081 with 3 cars parked in front, and then you can see 2 cars to the right of that. The black car is approximately where the access point, the drive-in, is from Wall Street, correct?
Correct.
And that's the drive-in we see if you now go to page 6. That's the drive-in we see in the lower half of page 6.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, so at April 1 of 2023, the 1081 building, which is 13,347 square feet, is 100% vacant, correct?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
At April 1, 2023, the building that is
Yep.
1081 Wall,
Yep.
13,347 square feet, is 100% vacant.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, your page 9 is a series of rent comparables that you've selected. Rent comparables C2, it's called. And is C2 intended to be a reference to zoning of these comparables?
Just for the commercial use of the premises that are being.
No fluoride stove without, yeah, with lots of cavities and dumping sections. So Danielle, no surprises, right?
Madam Chair, can you hear that?
Yes, I think maybe members who aren't speaking should mute their microphones. Yeah, thanks. Okay, go ahead.
So, all right, so again, page 9, the comparables, the reference to C2 is intended to reference the type of uses in that type of zoning?
That's correct.
Okay. And so, you know, you've got a series of comparables. Let me just look at a couple of them for a moment. Your 88B Sherbrooke.
Yep.
And you've got 2 leases there, one in 18, one in 19. That premise is a combination therapy, medical, rehabilitation. There's a large facility called Sherbrooke Therapy located there, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And your premises on Portage, 912 Portage, that's a strip mall on the south side of Portage. And it's got frontage all along Portage with a little bit of parking in front of Portage, agreed?
Yes, agreed.
So the 912 Portage building is within a car length and a drive aisle of Portage, correct?
That's correct.
And the subject 1081 building, of course, is, I don't know, it might be 100 yards off of Ellis, agreed?
Agreed.
And your 1054 Portage premises, again, same thing. It's a drive aisle and a car length away from Portage. This is Chantel's Bridal and Canadian Woodworker Retailers, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So obviously, these comparables on Portage have far superior visibility, I'll suggest, to the building at 1081 Wall. Do you agree?
I agree.
And Mr. Pontanilla, no longer on this docket, but at one time was 910 Wall, which is directly across the street, correct?
Correct.
And among the premises at 910 Wall is a premises called Value Lots, which is what I would call a discount type of store.
That's correct.
And the lease rate in place there is $6.32 a square foot, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And the use by Habitat for Humanity until they moved out, I would describe that as recycling of older building materials.
I haven't been inside. I'm unaware of the
All right.
actual use. I just know it as Habitat for Humanity.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so then let's look at your VSG comparables on page 11.
Yep.
So 232 St. Anne's, that's at the corner essentially of Fermor and St. Anne's, isn't it?
That's correct.
And that's a Mr. Lube.
That's what I have it as, correct.
And is Mr. Lube a well-known national and maybe even international chain?
That's a fair assessment.
And VIP Lube, the present occupant of the subject property, they're not nationally or internationally known, are they?
I'm unaware of the reputation they have outside of the city.
All right. And then 283 Ellis.
Yep.
That's actually at the corner of Ellis and Smith, isn't it?
Yes, I want to say so. I don't have it in front of me, the exact location.
That
doesn't sound off. Yeah, yeah, Ellis and
that's
Smith.
an Enterprise rent-a-car outlet.
Oh yeah. Yep, that's correct.
And then 721 Watt. That's a two-bay auto service facility, is that correct?
Yes, I have it as an auto clinic, so
Okay.
I'm not sure what services they offer, but
But it's also got a Domo gas bar on it.
I don't have that image in front of me right now.
Okay, well, I've looked and it's got a Domo gas bar.
Okay.
So page 12 is what you're telling us we should rely upon.
Yes, page 12.
And the vacancy was set at 15% to take into account the
Yep.
chronic vacancy of the property.
Yep.
The vacancy of the property today is still chronic, isn't it?
My understanding is that we do have a tenant now of the split partition. We have in one has a tenant. I'm not sure the other side.
Right. But even accepting that for the moment, because that's all post-reference, of course.
It is post-reference. That's right. Yep.
But if you look at your page 13, even if 4,458 square feet is still vacant.
Yep.
That leaves the vacancy over 26%, doesn't it?
I'd have to do the work on it to show the exact, but yeah, it seems to be around. It would hover around there
Yes.
for the neighborhood shopping.
4,458 square feet divided into 17,347. I
Yep.
get 26.22%.
Okay.
All right, now, your page 15. You're telling us that an investor buying this property would be happy to buy this property at an overall capitalization rate of 6.23%, correct?
Yep, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. Do you think an investor would treat the VSG, the lube premises income stream, any differently than the investor would treat the balance of the income associated with the property?
Well, not being an investor myself, it'd be merely speculation to sort of deduce what they would decide to make their purchase on.
Let me suggest this to you. That if I were an investor, and that's not fair, let me suggest that an investor would not pay more for the lube income stream than they would pay for the rest of the property. Can you accept that?
Sure, we can accept that.
All right. And of course, from that conclusion should flow that the capitalization rates should not be different, should they be?
If you're looking at it as one economic unit.
Right, okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden, any questions?
I do not have any further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Whitbread? You're on mute, Richard.
Page 12, looking at your income workup.
Yep.
Pardon me. You have a less vacancy allowance of 15%, and it's applied to both the bank and the retail property. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is that a fair calculation for the bank, given that it's been occupied throughout this? Would you not use a model number of 4%, say, on the bank?
So the 4% model vacancy that we use, that's just a general vacancy that we give to reflect the historical changes that take place over the years for vacancy, right? So it's sort of divided up into a rate that we sort of apply as an allowance for this particular stream, because the 13,347 square feet was completely vacant. The calculation to then apply the 15% vacancy was based on that area, because the 4,000 square feet bank is on the same income stream as the big building in the back. It just happens to be that the vacancy is then applied from the calculated total potential of both of those premises combined into the total potential for the neighborhood shopping center. So it's just a form of essentially how we record keep it. We don't have it split into its own streams. If we had the bank as its own stream, then there wouldn't be any vacancy on the bank, and it would only be on the stream that would be for the retail warehouse that's in the back. It's not divvied up like that.
Might I suggest a fairer presentation would have been that three-stream model, because it makes a difference of $11,000 or $12,000 to your net income, which is obviously going to change your total value.
Yeah, I mean, that's a way that it can be done. It's not historically done in the department like that. So that's definitely.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that. I've seen 3 and 4 streams. In fact, I think at number 5, before it was withdrawn, you had 4 or 5 4 streams.
There was that one was a little complicated, but no, I mean it's historically something that can be done. I don't have an explanation as to why some streams have it, some streams don't. Sometimes we have shopping centers that are all on one stream, sometimes it's not. I don't have an answer as to why that's the case. It's just the way that we have it.
At the bottom line, then, what I'm hearing you saying is your valuation is possibly overstated based on the vacancy rate applied to that stream for the credit union. I have no further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden.
I do have a question
Okay.
then. Is it not fair to say then that if you separated them into 2 streams, that the vacancy rate for the larger area, the 13,000 square feet, would be higher than 15%? I believe the municipal board has ruled that a chronic vacancy can be as high as 25%. Is that not true?
That is correct. If it's chronically vacant and if it's the entire size of the building. So if the building was fully vacant, yes, then 25% is the highest that we would issue on a chronic vacancy. But again, in this scenario, the way it's structured, it's not like that.
Right.
We do have they're both together. So that's why it's not up to 25%. But yep, you're right.
Right.
Yep, you're right.
So under that premise, then it's probably the valuation or the vacancy rate across the board is probably relatively fair.
Yep.
Would you agree? Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, how many years does it take to declare a property chronically vacant?
Oh, sorry, are you asking me?
I'm asking you.
My understanding is that we have to have at the very minimum 2 years, so a full assessment period of vacancy. That would then begin the review of beginning to do a vacancy adjustment on the stream. So that's my understanding of it.
But to get it to
As far as I'm
25,
aware.
but to get it to 25%, how many years would that take?
Well, that's based on size. So it can be 2 years, but that's if the whole building is chronically vacant, right? In this scenario, it's not because again, the bank and the big building in the back are being treated as one economic unit. But if the building was completely vacant for 2 consecutive years at a minimum, again, this is my understanding. I'm not putting this forward as official department guideline. This is just my understanding of it. It could be off, and I just want to be clear about that. But my understanding is that if we have a full assessment period vacant, then we can start to do the work to look at the size of the vacancy in relation to the building.
I understand that. So assume we don't have the bank in this valuation stream and
Yep.
it is standalone. Would you still maintain 2 years or would it be 3 to 5 years to get to 25%? Standalone.
If it was standalone, the 2 years would definitely begin the review of what the appropriate vacancy should be. Maybe one more cycle after that to go to the full 25% to give it a little time historically to see what's taking place. But yes, there would be an adjustment. And again, that's why the 15% was there, is because that was deemed to be appropriate, was to do the vacancy adjustment already to address that issue.
Sure. In past hearings, we've heard 3 to 5 years at least.
Okay, there you go then. Yep.
And that matches with what I hear you saying. Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, Madam Chair, no further questions.
Okay, thank you. And I have no questions. So Mr. Newman, please proceed.
Let me start by addressing comments and questions at the very end. This whole issue of vacancy. And I don't think it's in any of the materials I have filed on the properties we have left on the docket, but there is a relatively recent decision of the municipal board in a case called 75 Scurfield, which issued in 2022. And in that case, the board recited the history of decisions relating to vacancy. There are decisions where vacancy has been granted at 30%, at 35%. I know the city likes to speak to their policy that vacancy can never go beyond 25%. But as I say, the board has, in cases it's considered appropriate, granted a higher vacancy. The whole question here of whether you mix the income streams together, the bank together with the 1081 building, I'm calling it, or whether you separate them and the impact that has on vacancy. The reality is that if I'm a buyer looking to acquire this property at April 1 of 2023, 1081 Ellis, 13,347 square feet is 100% vacant and has been for 2 years. And I'm going to speak to that further, but I just thought I would address the comments that were made at the end. So having said all of that, the issues I have are essentially this. If you go to my page 3, you'll see I list as the issues, the rents, the vacancy, and the capitalization rate. Let's talk about the rents for the neighborhood shopping center. I'm not quarreling with the $32 rate on the credit union. That's accepted. I am quarreling with the rate in relation to the big building, I'll call it. or in 3,600 square feet at $10 a square foot. Why?
Mr. Newman, we lost you here. Did everybody else go freeze as well there? Yeah, okay. So I think maybe back up to where you're talking, you actually back up to where you finished talking about what we had just asked questions on and start again, because everything froze there for quite a bit.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, and that's a good lesson as to why you got to watch the panel. Because if I'm watching the panel instead of looking down, I notice that.
That's okay. It's not your problem.
No, but it's important, and it's something we always teach young people. Watch the panel, watch the judge, because it's important. So let me go back then. What I did is I took you to page 3 of my brief.
Yes.
I identified the issues: rents, vacancy, and capitalization rate. And then I started to talk about the rents for the neighborhood shopping center. The credit union is in at $32. I'm accepting that. There's no issue about that. The issue is on the rents on the 1081 building, which is 13,347 square feet. That building was completely vacant at April 1 of 23, as you know, had been vacant since the expiry of the lease of the prior tenant in June of 21. And as I'll show you in due course, they were given notice in December of 2020 that Habitat was departing and was not staying. And they began to market the building. So Habitat paid $12 a square foot. Discount store operations such as Giant Tiger typically pay in the range of $8 to $10 a square foot, because discount store operations, their business model is such that they can't pay what I'll call prime rent, and therefore they frequently take off-prime locations. If you think about the Giant Tigers that you see, often they're at the back of a property. They're kind of almost hidden away sometimes. 910 Wall, directly across the street to the south, Value Lots, a discount type of business operation, 27,958 square feet at $6.32 a square foot. Saint Amant, operating a thrift store, is at $10 a square foot. And this is my way of saying to you that the rents the assessor has used, and we went through them, and this is why I went through them, but the rents he has used on Portage, that are fronting onto the street, the C2 zoning type rents. Remember, the zoning here is a little different. But the rents fronting onto Portage, the 912 Portage rents at $14 and $17. Those premises are literally a car length away from Portage. That means greater visibility. The subject building at 1081 is much further set back, and from a visibility perspective, it's much diminished. The other observation I'll make is this is not what I would suggest to you in relative terms the nicest area to locate retail. Certainly further west along Ellis, you get into St. James and everything changes. And we're going to deal with a couple of properties there shortly. But here at Ellis and Wall, not the nicest area within which to locate retailing. And that's why what you see are discount type operations. Value Lots across the street. Habitat was a recycled discount type of operation, I would suggest. And so I say to you simply, be careful of the assessor's comparables, and that some of them, all of them actually on Portage and have much superior visibility. The Sherbrooke space is a medical clinic, therapy, etc. So I think these are very different premises. And accordingly, I'm suggesting to you, the rent at the end of the day should be $12. And I'll show all of this to you in a spreadsheet. Then the VSG. The tenant signed a lease at $18.94 a square foot. And that's a lease put in place in February of 2022. That is a very current lease. And again, when you look at the assessor's VSG comparables, 232 St. Anne's, the corner of Fermor and St. Anne's, I would suggest to you a superior location catering to the surrounding demographic, which is different than the demographic at Ellis and Wall. 283 Ellis is the Enterprise Rent-A-Car premises, and 721 Watt is the premises that also has a Domo gas bar located on it, which may well account for the rent that's being achieved. At the end of the day, a number of the assessor's comparables are in the $16, $18, and $20 range. And I think that $18.94 done in February of 22 is an appropriate rent to be used. Vacancy. We don't really have an issue here about vacancy in the sense that the assessor is using 15% as part of his calculation. I do point out to you, and I will show it to you, the landlord got notice in December of 2020 that 76.94% of the space would be vacant. And if you're an investor coming on the scene to buy this property at April 1 of 23, when you've got 76.94% of the property vacant, I think that's going to give you significant pause to consider the merit of your investment. Cap rates. Again, I don't want to belabor this. We spent a lot of time on this. Obviously, not drug or grocery store anchored. If we flip through it, ultimately the assessor is using 6.4 on the NSC stream and 5.05 on the VSG, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But if I look at this property, and again, it's about putting the property in the right place in the spectrum. I think the location is inferior. I think the property is also affected by a restrictive covenant, which is important to consider. So if you jump ahead to page 26 of my brief,
Yeah, we're there.
so here is the marketing brochure that came out immediately upon Habitat for Humanity giving notice that they were departing. And so page 27 is the brochure. Page 28 and 29 is the email that was sent to the property manager advising that Habitat was not intending to remain. And they advised the property manager that on December 1 that they were not staying. And that's what caused the marketing to begin. And then page 30 rather, through 41, through the end. That's a restrictive covenant agreement. So this was a Safeway at one time. And Safeway, when they sold the property, had the purchaser agree that they would not, for so long as Safeway had an open store at Madison Square, which remains open to this day, or at 600 Sargent, which remains open to this day, they would not put certain types of businesses into this property. And if you look at page 34, this agreement is June 18 of 2009. If you look at page 34 at the bottom, at no time during the prohibited period shall any or all or any portion of the servient tenements be used for the purposes of, on to the next page, a food store, a grocery store, a convenience store, a supermarket, for the sale of food or groceries, off-premises consumption, a drugstore, a pharmacy, the sale of prescription drug products, motor vehicle parking in relation to these uses. But it doesn't prohibit them from having a Tim Hortons, a Subway, a McDonald's, or an Applebee's, none of which you'll note are there. And prohibited period means commencing from the date of the agreement and continuing until they cease to operate at the locations which I know are Madison Square and 600 Sargent. And those are identified on page 40. So you can see on page 40 that Madison Square at 1612 Ness and 600 Sargent, which is Sargent at Maryland, between Maryland and Sherbrooke, they can't operate. So this becomes important from a couple of perspectives. Because the property has a significant encumbrance, a significant restriction, and that is the pool of tenants who can be sought out to potentially occupy. That makes it riskier. That impacts the capitalization rate, obviously. So if you now go to page 15, I say the property is located in a difficult area, difficult to lease large retail premises, former Safeway store, which continues to be encumbered by the restrictive covenant, which I've walked you through. At April 1 of 23, it's been known since December 1 of 20 that the habitat was not renewing and the space remained vacant at April 1 of 23. Any prospective purchaser would be concerned about buying the property with a 76.94% vacancy. VIP Lube is not a strong covenant. Cambrian Credit Union is not grocery or drugstore anchored, and neither could it be because of the restrictive covenant. I suggest the location is less than prime. The development is now older. The neighborhood demographics, I suggest respectfully in relative terms, are lower in terms of income. And so I set the capitalization rate at 7%. Now, recall I asked the assessor whether an investor buying this property would treat the vehicle service stream of income any differently than the rest of the income on the property. He agreed with me an investor would not do that, and agreed with me that therefore that would suggest that the capitalization rate should not be different for those two streams of income. So what I end up doing is I actually end up doing two scenarios for you. And I'll show you the spreadsheets. Scenario 1 uses $32 on the credit union. The vacant space is at $12, and the VIP Lube is at $18.94. The 15%, et cetera, 7% cap, $3,328,000. And again, I'll show you these in the spreadsheet format. And then I do scenario 2, which is separating two income streams. One is the non-VSG, all treated as one income stream at $32 and at $12 with a 15% vacancy. That becomes $3,059,000. And then the VSG using $18.94, but using a 6% capitalization rate. Nobody's buying commercial premises on what is essentially an apartment capitalization rate or lower at 5.05%. And so that value becomes $3,328,000. Let me just turn the pages on some photos quickly. Page 18, you can see the Lube in the upper, credit union, and then towards the back of the site, what was the Habitat for Humanity. Page 19, you can see the September 2007 photo of the Safeway. Page 19, you can see how far down the wall you have to come to get a good perspective on the building. And then my spreadsheets at page 21. There's the single stream of income scenario, 3,328,000. I'm going to speak about the vacancy in a moment. Page 22 and page 23 separate the two streams of income, take VIP lube out of it, and then put it onto a separate page, and you end up with a slightly higher value doing it that way. Now, let's just come back for a second to the vacancy, because we had some conversation about this at the outset. So recall that the vacancy is set at 15%, and Mr. Whitbread, you had some questions about whether that should apply to the bank, and certainly in theory, the bank could be done as a separate income stream. And indeed, I will tell you that historically, because I've done this property for a long time, the city actually used to do that. They used to create two income streams on this property, one for the credit union and one for 1081 Ellis, rather, the big building, because the lube wasn't there yet. They used to do that on a lot of properties. They've stopped doing it. They now tend to be combining the income stream completely. But even if you separated the income streams, at the end of the day, I would argue that 15% vacancy on the entirety of that building at April 1 of 23 isn't adequate, and it should be higher. So, but they've done what they've done. So at the end of the day, you see my values, and again, a little bit higher by separating the income streams, 3,328,000, treating it all as one, or 3,453,000, combining two separate income streams. At the very least, remember, the assessor seems to agree that the capitalization rate for the VSG should not be different. Those are my submissions, open to questions.
I just want to clarify with you these two scenarios, because you just said 3,453,000. And I'm seeing the bottom of scenario 2, the value is 3,393,000. Oh, you got 393, correct? And that's the lube?
Yes, so page 23.
Okay, okay, and so you add those two together. Okay, thank you.
Right.
Okay, so number 2, your value is 3 million. Can say that again? You said
yes. So the combined, where I separate the value.
Yep.
The value there is $3,453,000.
Thank you. Okay. And is there one of these that you favor here? I mean,
there is, and I favor the single income stream because I think that's how an investor would approach it.
Okay, thank you. All right. Mr. Fontenelle, any questions?
Yeah, just one question in regards to the vehicle service stream. So, Mr. Newman, looking at page 23 of your brief. So just to be clear, is the 393,000, that's what you're saying would be the value for the lube shop?
That's correct.
Okay. And are you aware that in 2022, when the lube shop was built, that the permit value was for $750,000?
It might be, but of course, things cost a lot of money to build and have a 50 or 70 or 100-year economic life.
Okay,
it's a return over time.
Okay, so just to be clear, that 393 was to capture that lube shop that we had the permit value for 750 for 2022.
If you're saying somehow the permit value should influence the worth of the property in the market, I don't think so.
Just for clarification, I'm just asking. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Ms. McFadden, any questions?
No, I think I understand this.
Okay, thank you. And I think I'm good as well. Mr. Pontnia, any a need for summation on this one?
No need for summation, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Newman?
I am good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item 7, which is 1017 St. James Avenue. So let's just take a minute to find this here. Okay, and Mr. Pomponier, there is a preliminary issue listed here, although you indicated that maybe that had been resolved.
Yes, I believe so. If you just give me 1 second to open up the
Okay, sure.
documents that I have in front of me. And so this would be the one where we had the non-cooperation. Yes, so we did have the non-cooperation. Originally we were seeking enforcing that, but I had some discussion with Mr. Newman, and he had brought it to my attention that so maybe if I say anything wrong, he can just enlighten me on it, because he did bring it to my attention. But from my memory serving me correctly, there was a request for an extension for this particular roll number for the income and expense information for 2022. And if I'm not mistaken, so this property and the next property coming up, 1045 St. James, it's operated by the same property manager. And so the property manager had sent us an email with the cover letter for 1045 St. James, but the income and expense information for 1017 St. James. So that was my understanding of what had happened there. It was a miss, I guess, entry in our systems. And once I confirmed that that was indeed the case, then I had advised Mr. Newman that we wouldn't be seeking the non-cooperation. So I'll just present what we have on file for the subject
Okay,
property.
so you're withdrawing that. Okay.
Yes, we can withdraw that.
Okay, you can go ahead and read this onto the roll then, please.
Okay, so up next we have file 24-3334. The roll number is 1309-906-8840. The address is 1017 St. James Street. The 2025 assessment has gone out at $5,727,000. So we are once again speaking of a neighborhood shopping center. We have 2 buildings associated with the subject property, 7 premises associated, an actual year built of 1988 and 2010, with an effective year built of 2000 and 2010. The total land area is 72,717 square feet, and the total leasable area is 13,883 square feet. On page 2, I have included a pad eye view image of the subject property. On page 3, I have included an overhead view of pictometry of the subject property. On page 4, we have a south-facing view and a west-facing view of the subject property. And then on page 5 and 6, we do have the Google Street View images of the subject property. And there was a blend there from the 2021 and 24 map overlay. So we spoke about the request for income and expense information, so we're okay there. We don't have any sales history or leases that come up for the subject property. And then for the rent comparables, I have included rent comparables from the market region 6. So it's the same market region as the subject property. These are all neighborhood shopping centers. And we do have areas that range from about 1,500 square feet at the lower end up to, I believe it's just over 5,000 square feet at the higher end for areas. And then for rental rates, we do have rates that range from $18, I believe it is, at the lower end, up to just over $30 at the higher end. Following that, I do have the information for the income stream for the subject property. So we do have 7 premises that are on the income stream. We do have areas that range from 593 square feet at the lower end up to 6,389 square feet at the higher end. And then we do have modeled rents that range from $22 at the lower end up to about $33 at the higher end. The total potential modeled rent is $374,394. And when we divide that by the total area on file, it gives us a blended rate for the subject property of $26.97 per square foot. From there, we do have the model parameters for vacancy for 4%, 3% expense, and a $9 shortfall per square foot, which brings us to a net operating income of $343,637. And we have the net operating income capped at 6% to give us a total assessed value of $5,727,000. On page 11, I have included the income value summary of the information that I've just presented. On page 12, once again, we have our cap rate table there. On page 13, I have included the Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. And then on page, I believe it was beginning at 14 and taking us to the end of the brief was the original information I had put for these subject properties. Income and expense information, which has then been superseded by the information presented in the discovery period. And I believe that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Any questions?
A couple of questions. Obviously not grocery or drugstore anchored, correct?
Correct.
And if you look at your page 9, again, everything on page 9 is model driven.
Yes, that's correct.
And but it does identify the uses of the premises. And from that, I see that there are, it appears, 5 different restaurant premises.
I see 4. C4 for the second premise, and then the third premise, fourth premise, fifth premise.
And what about A2 at the bottom?
Oh, you know what? You're right. Yep, that's right. That evaded me. Yep, and then A2 at the bottom. That's correct.
All right.
You are right.
So again, lots of restaurant related uses on these premises.
Yes.
Those are my questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread.
No, I have none, thank you.
Ms. McFadden.
I have none as well. Thank you.
And I have none either. So Mr. Newman, please proceed.
Page 2 of my brief.
Okay, go ahead.
So just to get a little bit of background on the property, much of which you've heard already. There's a mix of office and restaurant related uses. This is a property where historically they used to do 2 income streams. And they would separate the restaurant and the office. They've stopped doing that. And I think appropriately so, because that's how an investor is going to value it. So 2 issues, the rents and the capitalization rate. The assessor is using a blended rate of $26.97 a square foot. I think that's too high. What I've done is I've gone to the immediately surrounding area. If you look at my page 3, and I've looked for premises immediately surrounding. The majority of them are restaurant related uses. And you can see that the rates range from, I guess, at the low end, $18 to $26 at the high end. For very similar type uses, I'll suggest. I've ultimately selected $25 a square foot. I think that's representative of market, and that's what I'm using. On the capitalization rate, we come back to the same conversation we've had on all the other properties. I won't belabor it. As the assessor said earlier, restaurants bring volatility. So this property is restaurant heavy. It's going to bring volatility because of that. I'd also point out, if we go to page 8. We see a number of sales there on page 8. Comparable number 1 and comparable number 10. These are sales that are actually almost immediately adjacent. Comparable number 1 is at the corner of Century and Ellis, Route 90. That's the Value Village. Comparable number 10 is truly immediately next door. It's the Lazy Boy Furniture premises, which is immediately next door. So, you know, those are a couple of good comparables. Again, is this retail? If you look at page 9, is this retail top quality? Is it retail standard quality? I would say to you, it's retail standard quality, no grocery, no drug anchors. But what I would say to you, and what I have done ultimately, is if you jump ahead to my page 15, what I'm saying to you ultimately is that when you think about the rising interest rates, when you think about all the restaurant closures I told you about in my earlier submissions, and at the top of page 15, I talk about multiple Stellas, I talk about Segovia, I talk about Hermanos, the Perkins chain failed as well, which I mentioned here. Staff shortages for restaurants. Restaurant is risky. Tenancy based on restaurant is riskier, I'll suggest to you. But rather than go with the 7 to 7.5, which Altus would suggest for standard retail property, I've gone to 6.75%, because what I am doing a little bit is I'm recognizing what I call the locational aspect of the property. You know, it's got a reasonably prominent corner. It is high traffic, but it's got a reasonably prominent corner. And so at the end of the day, I'm increasing the cap rate from 6% to 6.75%. I think you've got, and I say this about all the properties we've done today, I think you've got better evidence on the cap rate issue from my side of the table than with respect from the assessor side of the table. And so you can see at my page 18, my use of the $25, my use of 6.75%, and that becomes $4,714,000. So what you need to decide is adjust the rents to 25 from 26.97 and move the cap rate to 6.75 from 6%. That's my submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Puntney, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. McFadden, any questions?
No question, thank you.
Mr. Whitbread?
I'm just doing one calculation.
Okay,
No, I'm fine, thank you, no questions.
and I'm good as well. So, Mr. Puntney, any need for summation here?
No need for summation, thank you.
And Mr. Newman?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to item number 8 on the docket, which is 1045 St. James Street. So once you pull that up, Mr. Pontonia, please proceed.
Okay, just about ready. Okay. Just make sure everything's open here and I can see. All right, so last off we have file 24-3329. The roll number is 13000461000. The address is 1045 St. James Street. The 2025 assessment has gone out at $5,874,000. We do have one building associated. There are 10 premises associated with the subject property. It's a one-story building, and we have an actual year built and effective year built of 1988. Total land area of 103,244 square feet, and a total leasable area of 35,758 square feet. On page 2, I have included a pad eye view image of the subject property. On page 3, you can see the overhead view of the subject property. On page 4, I have included a north-facing view and a east-facing view of the subject property. And on page 5 and 6, I have included some Google Street View images of the subject property. And that would be with a 2024 map overlay. On page 7, we have received requests for income and expense information, so we're okay there. We have no sales that are being shown for the subject property. Following that, we do have the subject property leases that are generated in the brief. We can see we have some long-term leases there, as well as some newer leases. We do have a leased area that ranges from 1,380 square feet up to 5,697 square feet at the higher end. And then we do have rents that are being achieved from about $10 at the lower end up to $18 at the higher end. Following that, I have included some rent comparables for the subject property. So these rent comparables would be within the same market region as the subject property. We do have areas that range from, looks to be just over 1,000 square feet up to just under 10,000 square feet at the higher end. And then we do have rents that range from lower than that, $10 it would be at the lower end, up to just over mid-20s at the higher end, so about $26. On page 10, we do have the income stream for the subject property. So we do have 10 premises associated with the subject property on the stream. We do have the areas that range from 1,380 at the lower end up to 8,205 square feet at the higher end. These are all modeled rental rates. And we do have modeled rates that range from $8.97 per square foot at the lower end up to $13.93, it looks like, at the higher end. The modeled total potential rent for the subject property is $430,263, with the total area of 35,758 square feet, which gives us a blended rate for the subject property of $12.03 per square foot. From there, we have the model parameters in place for the subject property. And that brings us to a net operating income of $373,005. And then we have a modeled cap rate of 6.35%. And that brings us to our assessed value of $5,874,000. On page 11, I have included the income value summary for the information that I've just provided. On page 12, I do have the cap rate information provided. On page 13, the Municipal Assessment Act excerpts that are provided. And then on page 14, and taking us to the end of my brief, is the subject's income and expense information. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, questions?
Page 3 of your brief, please.
Yep.
So the building is sort of L-shaped. Have you ever heard the expression the elbow or the heel in the context of the configuration of a property?
I'm not sure if I have actually. The
So
elbow.
if you look, you see where the number 1045 is.
Yep.
And you see the premises go below that. And if you imagine, that's either your foot and your leg, or that's your arm and the elbow. The point is, it's in the corner.
Yep.
And so what you've got is you've got a significant premises that's kind of in the corner, which is going to have very little window area or window space potentially. That's the concept.
Okay.
Okay. Now, in this photo, we don't see St. James on this photo, do we?
That's correct.
But it would be to the left side of the photo.
Correct.
All right. Then if we look at your page 4, so Ellis is at the top.
Yep.
And again, one of the Altus comparables is the building right to the top with the number 1425 on it. That's the Lazy Boy premises. But again, I don't think we quite see St. James, but it would be on the right side of the photo, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then your photos on page 5, these are intended to be 2 photos from St. James, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And then everything on page 9 is model driven.
Yes.
And the model again generates a 6.35 cap.
Correct.
I see 4 spaces identified as restaurant spaces, correct?
Correct.
Not grocery store or drugstore anchored, correct?
Correct.
And in terms of how the cap rate is arrived at, I guess you can't say much more than the model.
That's correct.
All right, now, if you look at your page 14, that's the questionnaire which shows vacancy of 12%. Did you go back and look at historic vacancy at all?
Give me a second.
I think you're telling me you're doing it now, but maybe you didn't do it before.
No, I have I just have some quick notes in front of me. No, I don't have any notes on the historical nature of the vacancy.
All right. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
I don't.
Ms. McFadden?
Mr. Pontanilla, if we're looking at your photo on page 4. Yep. Particularly the north-facing view.
Yep.
It looks as though this property at 1045 St. James doesn't actually even have frontage on St. James Street. It looks like the frontage on St. James is actually the building below it. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct. I believe it's a brick that's there, unless my memory's confused. But yes, there is like a furniture store in front, or you can see almost the parcel there. There's another parcel that's yeah, that's correct.
So they must have some sort of caveat that allows them to cross.
That could be. That's right. I haven't looked at those lease particularities, but yes, that's a fair assessment.
That's a fairly odd configuration.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Yeah, it has the St. James address site, but it's actually quite so the store in front of it, the furniture store, that's on Ellis, correct? So, and then St. James.
No, I think unless I'm mistaken, so if we're looking at my page 4, and then as Mr. Newman alluded, if you go to the right, so to speak, so if you were to,
yeah, that's St.
I
James.
guess that would be east. Yeah, that would be St. James to the right. That's right. And
Sorry.
so then that building there, I think it's, unless my memory is mistaking me, but I believe it's a furniture store. I think it's a brick, if I'm not mistaken.
There's a brick there's a brick there, and then also there's a Lazy Boy store on Ellis. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to orient myself. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so got it. Thank you. All right, no other questions from me then. So Mr. Newman, please proceed.
Let me start where we just ended, because it's important. If you go to my page 17.
Okay.
So there's a more zoomed out overhead view. And I think it allows for a good understanding of the configuration of the property. And yes, it has a St. James address, but it's a country mile, as they sometimes say, from St. James. It's quite a ways back. And not only is it quite a ways back, but imagine you are southbound on St. James, approaching Ellis. All you're going to see for a long time is the wall of the brick. The brick is 100,000 square feet. So all you're going to see is the wall of the brick. Then as you start to come past the brick heading southbound, a port, an opening opens up, but it's a busy street, so you got to be careful. And then that port closes very quickly because the building that says Wyatt Dowling, that's 1017 St. James that we've just dealt with. So it doesn't have a lot of visibility. And then if you're along Ellis, for the same reason, again, 1017 St. James will obstruct view to some extent. And as the chair noted, that store towards the right-hand top of the photo, that's the Lazy Boy Furniture Store. So that's the configuration of the immediate area. It obviously creates a significant visibility issue for the property. And so the issues we raise, and I go back now to page 2 of my brief. The issues we raise relate to vacancy and capitalization rate. I tell you the 2023 value was $3,652,000. That's because historically, this property had chronic vacancy and had a very high vacancy rate. Suddenly that vacancy rate is dropped down to 6%. And yet, the questionnaires are attached, but you see at the top of my page 3, it's had 12% vacancy throughout 20, throughout 21, throughout 22. And I told you earlier about a municipal board decision, 75 Skirfield. Here's an excerpt from the decision. And the essence of what it says is that no prospective buyer is going to ignore an ongoing and significant vacancy. So ultimately, I'm asking you to bring the vacancy back to 12%, up from 6%, and that's the issue on vacancy. On capitalization rate, again, it's the same thing. And I must say, in a general sense, obviously capitalization rate has been a theme of everything we've done this morning. I have 2 sets of briefs that I have to file later this week, all retail. And universally, I have seen capitalization rates on the retail properties drop to what I consider to be unusually low levels. It almost seems like the department was quite aggressive on the capitalization rates on retail, which is not, I would suggest to you, supported by the market. So we come back to the cap rate. Again, this is a non-anchored strip mall. It's got visibility issues. It's got historic vacancy issues. And so, you know, I repeat everything I've said to you in the past. Again, it's all about putting the building in the right place in the spectrum of properties, considering its characteristics. I go to page 9, and there's the Altus cap rate study, comparable number 1. As I've told you, is the Value Village property at Century and Route 90. And comparable number 10 is the Lazy Boy premises. But overall, you're seeing higher capitalization rates than the assessor is suggesting. Again, not retail top quality. I'll just put it into the standard quality, 7 to 7.5. Tenants here are generally speaking small local tenants. You've got 4 restaurants. You've got the volatility, which the assessor has acknowledged, come with restaurant premises. So I go now to page 14. And my conclusions. So again, not grocery or drugstore anchored, small local businesses, history of vacancy. Vacancy 12% in each of 2021 and 22, and it was higher than that in prior years. Essentially has no visibility, I'll suggest, hidden behind other buildings. A portion of it is in the elbow, not on a major regional street, although it has a St. James address, but it's not because it's set back. Significant adjacent retail sites, and I say this in the context of both this property and 1017. If we think about what's going on in the area, with great fanfare, the Winnipeg Stadium was demolished. Target was built. With great fanfare, not. Target disappeared. They folded their tent and they went home. And they've had great difficulty in leasing that premises. And what that led to is an attempt to essentially rezone and allow that area to be now turned into multifamily, at least to some extent. And so the Winnipeg Stadium Target site is doing the same thing. They're shifting to multifamily uses. The property across the street on the west side of St. James, where those yellow brick warehouses used to be, they've got zoning approval for multifamily. Because retail is declining and real estate owners are finding it more difficult to make it work. So if you then jump ahead to my page 22, you see the assessor's gross potential income, 12% vacancy, and a 7% capitalization rate, which puts the value at $4,695,000. Those are my submissions. I'm open to questions.
Thank you. Mr. Ponticelli, any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no questions at this time.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden, any questions for Mr. Newman?
Mr. Newman, you've shown 3 years of vacancies, which I think end in 22. Can you tell us if the space had 12% vacancy at the date of April 1st, 23?
It did.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
And I think I have no additional questions. So any need for summation, Mr. Ponticelli?
No need for summation. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Newman?
Just very briefly at a high level, and I said it a few moments ago, I think, as I've said to you before, none of you are new to this. You've all been doing this for a long time. You all understand that different buildings have their place in the spectrum. And the question is, where do these buildings fall? You've got, I'll suggest respectfully, better evidence in terms of cap rates based on comparable sales, which you can rely upon. And I think you should feel quite open to making adjustments to the capitalization rates. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have heard all the items on our agenda this morning, so this hearing is now adjourned, and I'd like to thank you both gentlemen for your participation and your presentations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, panel members. Thank you, Mark. We'll be in touch.
Good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good
guys.
day.
Madam Chair, I apparently I need to move to one of the offices so that we can leave this boardroom free for the next hearing.
Okay,
I'm going to take us online and then I'll let you know how this will go about.
okay, yeah, yes, take us offline, and then if you need us to sign out and sign back in, you can let us know afterwards.
All right, thank you, just a moment.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, you too.